So it is my great pleasure now to bring this part of the conference to a different type of twist. It was very important for us as the organizing committee to ensure that all players were involved with the conference. We've heard a lot today from various panelists and from various people in the room that government plays a very important part. So we asked the Canadian government to come and do a presentation to the group on the labour market transfer agreements, which include the labour market agreements for persons with disabilities. So it's my great pleasure, and I'm just personally, I'm so excited to see that we're all able to sit in the same room together. I think that this is great. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Eppo Maertens. Eppo is the director of the Opportunities Fund, also responsible for the labour market agreements for persons with disabilities and the Canada Jobs Fund. Eppo has a background in economics and journalism and public policy. He went to school both at Western and at Carleton universities. He's been in his current role for about a year and a half, but has been 12 years in government and was in journalism prior to his current stint in government. And during that time, he's worked in a variety of backgrounds, from compliance to workplace well-being. And now, of course, is in the policy department at ESDC, skills training specifically, including disability. Eppo will be presenting for about 15 to 20 minutes, and if time permits, we'll be doing questions afterwards. Okay, so thank you very much. Welcome, Eppo.
Thank you so much, Maureen. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with all of you who come from such very different backgrounds, but I think all in a very coming together for a common cause. And it's been really great to be able to interact with so many different people from so many different perspectives. So as Maureen mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the labor market transfers today. And in a nutshell, basically what the transfers do is they transfer money from the federal government to the provinces and territories to deliver skills training and other employment programs to Canadians. So I'm going to give a little bit of just a little bit of context before getting into the more specifics on the labor market transfers. And then I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that have been happening more recently on that front. Some of you may know there are a number of changes in the works following some consultations that we did last year and an announcement in the budget back in April. So I'll go through a bit of those in more detail. So of course, government policy around persons with disabilities falls into a number of different buckets, all of which work in tandem and work together. The buckets are not necessarily neat and separate buckets. There's a lot of overlap between them. And a lot of, impact of one on the other. Policies that promote economic development for persons with disabilities also have an effect on health and social inclusion, and vice versa for the other policy areas. So, with that in mind, I will focus mainly on the labor market programs. As sort of one of the key pillars of the support system for persons with disabilities. So there's actually been a long history of labor market programming for persons with disabilities. It goes back a good 65 years or so, starting with the vocational rehabilitation Disabled Persons Program, starting in 1952, and that had a very long life, with changes coming only by the late 90s, following, I think, in large part from the federal task force in 1996, the Scott Task Force. Following that, there was a number of key changes. One was the introduction of the Opportunities Fund for persons with disabilities. And the other was the first employability assistance for people with disabilities agreements, which I think I think we can see them as an evolution from the vocational rehabilitation. And then a further evolution in 2004 to the present, to the current labor market agreements for persons with disabilities. I talked to some of you yesterday about the Opportunities Fund for persons with disabilities. The Opportunities Fund is not a transfer. It's not one of the transfer packages, because we deliver that ourselves as a federal government. But certainly it complements the transfers. So I did want to make a mention of that before I go into the transfers. I think it's an important part of the landscape in terms of the network of supports that are available through the government. And we've included here a few results on some of the things that the Opportunities Fund has achieved over the course of 2016-2017, where we have the latest data. So going on to the labor market transfer agreements themselves, there are 4 transfers, and as I mentioned earlier, basically they transfer federal funds to the provinces and territories to deliver skills training programs and other employment supports to all Canadians, including persons with disabilities. And there are four transfers. I want to say currently, one of them did expire in March, but 4 transfers that we talk about when we talk about the transfer landscape. The biggest by far is the Labor Market Development Agreement. It's for people who have some connection to EI, either as a past recipient of EI or a premium payer. And that makes up nearly $2 billion. Or a little more than $2 billion if you include all the administrative costs in that, that's transferred to the provinces and territories. Then we have the Canada Job Fund, which is $500 million a year, and it has a broader eligibility. It's not dependent on EI eligibility, and it's really open to all Canadians. And both of these funds do fund programming for persons with disabilities. But in addition to that, there is, of course, one transfer that's specifically targeted for persons with disabilities, and that's the Labor Market Agreement for persons with disabilities. And then I just mentioned the Target Initiative for Older Workers, which was in place for about 10 years, and it transferred money to the provinces and territories for specific programming to reintegrate older workers back into the workforce. So as I mentioned, the labor market agreements for persons with disabilities, it's currently the largest single federal investment in labor market programming for persons with disabilities. And it allows provinces and territories to design and deliver programs in 5 key priority areas. These include education and training, employment participation, employment opportunities, connecting employers and persons with disabilities, and building knowledge. So basically piloting new approaches, research and innovation in programming for persons with disabilities. And they support a very wide array of programs and services, including employment counseling, job coaching, skills training, workplace accommodations, and work experience, including, for example, youth internships. So we have a bit of data up here. there's been over 3,000 employment-enhancing interventions annually, 300,000, delivered through 115 programs across Canada each year. So I mentioned that there are some changes coming and under the labor market transfer agreements. As part of the election platform for the current government, there was a commitment to rationalize and expand the existing labor market agreements and to put more money into skills training in general. So we received this mandate at ESDC to take a look at the 4 transfers and to see how we could enact that and to see what we could propose. So we engaged in a quite extensive stakeholder consultation in 2016 during the summer and fall. We worked very closely with provinces and territories during this consultation period. We spoke to about 700 different organizations. We received about 70 written submissions. There were consultation sessions held both in the federal government, by the federal government, and through the provinces and territories, all of which fed into a single process of reforming the transfer agreements. And those consultations included a really broad spectrum of Canadians and different organizations representing business, representing labor, service providers, academics, and of course groups representing persons with disabilities as well. And there were a few reoccurring themes that came out of these consultations. So one was a need to have flexibility, and flexibility to really offer individualized solutions to clients and to employers by removing some of the prescriptive elements that were included in the existing transfer agreements. And also to reduce the complexity of the system, which is now a series of 4 transfers into something maybe a little bit more streamlined and easier for the provinces to manage, and therefore easier also in terms of their ability to deliver programs. A push for innovation, sharing best practices, being able to experiment with new approaches and share knowledge. And of course, a better emphasis on measuring the impact of the programs, a better performance measurement system so we can see the impact that these programs are having on Canadians. And of course, one of the things that many stakeholders also emphasized was the importance of recognizing programming and maintaining programming for persons with disabilities. So these consultations were wrapped up in a report done through the Federation of Labour Market Ministers and informed the announcement in the April budget to consolidate and expand the existing transfers. So consolidate from 4 transfers into 2. There will continue to be the labor market development agreements for EI recipients, former and current, and also but then to consolidate the 3 others: the Canada Job Fund, the labor market agreement for persons with disabilities, and then ultimately a decision was taken not to renew the targeted initiative for older workers, which expired in March, but to consolidate it into these new agreements, which will be called the Workforce Development Agreements. So there'll be 2 agreements now for EI, the Labor Market Development Agreements, and for non-EI, the Workforce Development Agreements. So as part of the modernization, as I said, substantial new investments were being made as well into the agreements, with $900 million over 6 years in the new Workforce Development Agreements and $1.8 billion over 6 years for the labor market development agreements. So basically, the goal of this was, as I said, to streamline the current system, and to inject more money into the system to provide more flexibility for provinces and territories to deliver programming. And in total, over a period of 6 years, the agreements will put about $20 billion into the skills training program in the country through the provinces and territories. I mentioned some of the key things coming out of the consultation, some of the key priorities. One is a new performance measurement strategy. In the past, each of the transfers had their own performance measurement, some very robust, like the labor market development agreements, some less so. We're moving to a consolidated one that will allow us to better measure the impacts, and moving away from not just looking at investments and the number of clients served, but truly at the impacts that these programs are having on the labor market outcomes of individuals under the program. So I think this gives a pretty good overview, and I did want to leave a little bit of time for discussion, but maybe just to talk a little bit about some of the next steps. We are, of course, under negotiations with the provinces and territories currently. Our deadline to get these negotiations done is the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of March this year, and hopefully we'll have a few of them signed a little earlier. And of course, to get into place on the same timeline, the new performance measurement strategy, and we received agreement on that from the provinces and territories last month. And we're working to set timetables right now for the implementation of that. So just the last point, maybe just before we go into questions, I know probably one of the burning questions on the minds of many people here is under the new consolidated workforce development agreement, what is going to be how will persons with disabilities be recognized? And of course, I can't go into too many details on that because the agreements are under negotiation with the provinces and territories. But what I can say is during the consultations, there was definitely, we heard loud and clear from stakeholders that there needs to be a protection for funding for persons with disabilities, and that we need to see funding levels maintained and if possible, augmented under the new agreements. And that this was a sentiment that was very much echoed around the table when the ministers gathered to talk about the results of this agreement. So we are working with provinces and territories on specific language, recognizing persons with disabilities, and on specific financial provisions in terms of funding for persons with disabilities. So I think I'll leave it at that, and then.
Eppo, thank you very much for that. We will entertain some questions. One of the first questions that have been asked is this deck available? If we're okay to upload it to the website for people to have a look at?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
wonderful. So
Yeah,
we've got some questions.
Oh, and just to maybe mention on that note also, there is a French version of the deck,
Yeah.
which you can put up as well. We only have the one screen, so we thought it would be better to put up the English, but it's definitely available. Et s'il y a des questions en français, je suis heureux de répondre en français.
Thank you so much for your presentation. When you talk about the reporting requirements, and when you count the number of people that are employed, what are we really counting? I ask this because consistently we've seen that if a person goes to work for a day, a week, a month, maybe that is now a success, and that's how you're counted. How is that recorded and counted in your accountability framework?
That's a really great question. And I think one of the things that we definitely had in mind in designing the performance measurement strategy is that employment and earning income is only one outcome, and that in many cases it's a journey to get into the labor market and to create sustained and long-lasting attachment to the labor market is sometimes goes in a number of steps. So we are including measures in the performance measurement strategy that do go beyond simply income measures and employment outcome measures, but also looking at, for example, completing a training intervention, for example, can be a step along the way. And there's also other measures that we can look at in terms of self-assessments of resilience, self-assessments of improved efficacy, and so on, that we've discussed with certain provinces and territories, and that we want to start integrating into some of the performance measurement as well, just to make sure that we are capturing that idea that the success of these programs, although the ultimate goal would be employment and self-sufficiency, that maybe not everybody will reach that goal, and for some people, it'll be a number of steps to reach that goal.
Yes, good afternoon. Bonnie Brayton from Dawn Canada, Réseau Action des Femmes Handicapées du Canada. Thank you for your presentation. I don't want to put you on the spot, but certainly you know your Prime Minister has made strong commitments to women and girls, and of course, women and girls with disabilities and deaf women and girls have the highest barriers to accessing employment. So I'm just wondering if you have already, or if you're beginning to look at how the allocations will be made based on gender and other intersections that become quite important when we're talking about which people are the furthest from the job market, the labor market. Thank you.
No, that's definitely a concern across government. When there's a policy development process like we've been going through over the past year, there is always a requirement that there be gender-based analysis, and that there be some understanding of of the impacts the program will have on gender inequality and the ways it can impact it either positively or negatively, as the case may be, and how to address that. So that's definitely a part of this. Gender is a big part, of course, of the performance measurement strategy as well. So very much on the radar.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Colson from Local 793. I'm not familiar with your program personally, but I do represent workers in the WSIB system. And I want to know if you have a restriction on how long a program can last. Because in WSIB, they will only sponsor a retraining program that is a maximum of 3 years. Mm-hmm. So does your program have restrictions?
No, we're open in terms of the terms of the agreement, and it's really up to the province and territory to make that decision. And that's maybe just an important point to sort of underline as well. That we've tried to create a pretty flexible system in terms of the agreements that we've drafted. Provinces and territories, of course, are able to tailor that to their needs, and they can add conditions on if there's particular priorities that they feel they want to put in place. But no, there are no restrictions under the programs.
I think our next question is here.
Hi, I'm Gary Malkowski from the Canadian Hearing Society. Just a quick question related to the labor market agreement for people with disabilities. You've got $220 million, billion, that was the interpreter error, $220 billion allotted. With the new federal legislation, which is proposed for spring, I'm wondering, is there an additional amount of money coming to that?
Yeah, so it is actually $220 million per year for the labor market agreements for persons with disabilities, and I can't really speak to the new legislation. It is going to be separate. There will be employment aspects, and whether there'll be additional funding for labor programs under following that legislation will be a decision that the government would make and announce through the budget. So not really a question I can answer at this point.
So we'll just do one more last question, and then we're going to close up and thank Eppo so very, very much. So yes, go ahead.
I'll strive to end on a positive note then. Sean McEwen from Calgary. More of a comment than a question. I've been working with the Opportunities Fund implementing projects in the Calgary region since 2003 with Indigenous communities, with urban job seekers. I guess what I would say is I'm really happy with the Opportunities Fund, and I'm sorry you guys don't have double the budget. You call yourselves the fund of last resort, or you used to anyway, maybe you've changed that now. What we've seen is that a lot of people accessing provincially funded employment programs get screened out because their needs are deemed too high. So people with FAS, people with high functioning autism, those kinds of labels and diagnoses, they're simply not getting the support that they need to, and it's the Opportunities Fund that catches those people. The gentleman that was asking yesterday, where do people go when they run out of WCB? They go to you. They go to the Opportunities Fund. I'm really pleased with it, and I think it should have double the budget.
Well, thank you. That's great feedback and much appreciated.